When Napoleon Bonaparte died in 1821 on the remote island of St Helena, the story of his empire is well known. But what of his children? The heir he never reigned beside, the sons born in secret, the daughters who vanished in infancy, and the legacy that stretched quietly into the generations that followed. In the next 45 minutes we track one by one the lives of the men and women who bore his blood or carried his name, from imperial promise to exile, from diplomatic salons to sudden death. What became of them, and of the line of a man who once ruled Europe? Let's begin with his legitimate heir, then move through the acknowledged and the unacknowledged until we reach the final fading echoes of the Bonaparte bloodline. Born on March 20th, 1811, in the Tuileries Palace, Napoleon François Joseph Charles Bonaparte entered the world as the son of Napoleon III and his second wife, Marie-Louise of Austria. From the moment of his birth, he bore the weight of imperial expectation. Proclaimed King of Rome, he was intended to continue the Bonaparte dynasty that his father had built across Europe. The child's arrival brought Napoleon immense joy and political validation. Here was the legitimate heir the emperor had desperately needed, born to a Habsburg princess who cemented Napoleon's place among European royalty. The infant's title as King of Rome deliberately echoed the Holy Roman Empire, positioning him as successor to both French imperial power and ancient European tradition. However, this golden beginning would prove tragically brief. When Napoleon abdicated in 1814, the 3-year-old lost his title and inheritance. The Congress of Vienna erased his claim to the French throne, and the child who had been born to rule an empire found himself instead a political refugee. Following Napoleon's first abdication, Marie-Louise took her son to Austria, where he would spend the remainder of his short life under the watchful eye of his grandfather, Emperor Francis I. The Austrian court, while providing material comfort, ensured the boy remained isolated from French influence and any potential restoration plots. In 1818, the Austrian emperor granted the boy the title Duke of Reichstadt, a minor German duchy that provided rank without meaningful power. This title symbolized his transformed status, no longer the heir to a great empire, but merely another minor nobleman in the Habsburg hierarchy. The young duke received an excellent education befitting his rank, studying languages, military science, and statecraft under Austrian tutors, who carefully avoided inflaming any French sympathies. Despite Austrian efforts to suppress his French identity, the Duke remained fascinated by his father's legacy. He secretly studied Napoleon's campaigns and reportedly kept portraits of the emperor hidden in his rooms. This quiet rebellion against his circumstances would characterize much of his brief adult life, a young man caught between the modest Austrian role assigned to him and the imperial destiny he had lost. The Duke of Reichstadt's career was severely limited by Austrian suspicion and his deteriorating health. Although he received military training and held the nominal rank of colonel in the Austrian army, he was never permitted to see actual combat or hold meaningful command. The Austrians understood that any military success might rekindle French Bonapartist sentiment. From his late teens, the Duke suffered from increasingly severe respiratory problems, likely tuberculosis. The disease that would eventually kill him severely restricted his activities and rendered academic any discussion of future political roles. His physical decline paralleled his political marginalization. As his body weakened, so did any remaining hopes for a Bonaparte restoration. Contemporary accounts describe a young man of considerable intelligence and charm, fluent in multiple languages and possessed of his father's strategic mind. However, these talents found little outlet in the constrained world of the Austrian court. He spent his final years largely confined to palace life, studying military history and corresponding with a small circle of friends who shared his interest in his father's legacy. The Duke of Reichstadt never married and left no legitimate heirs. His declining health made marriage negotiations academic, though various political alliances had been proposed during his healthier years. The Austrian court, while maintaining him in comfort, showed little interest in facilitating a marriage that might produce Bonaparte heirs. Some historians suggest the Duke may have had romantic attachments, but these remain largely speculative. His isolation at the Austrian court and his declining health severely limited opportunities for meaningful relationships. The absence of a wife and children meant that Napoleon's legitimate line would end with this young man. The relationship between Napoleon and his son was tragically limited. The emperor saw his heir only during the boy's first 3 years before the events of 1814 separated them forever. Napoleon's letters from exile revealed deep affection for the child he called l'aiglon, the eaglet, and genuine anguish at their separation. During his St Helena exile, Napoleon frequently spoke of his son and expressed hopes for the boy's future. He dictated detailed instructions for the Duke's education and political development, though these never reached their intended recipient. The Emperor's will famously declared his son his heir to the throne of France, a meaningless gesture given political realities. For his part, the Duke maintained a complex relationship with his father's memory. Publicly, he observed Austrian expectations and avoided political statements. Privately, he studied Napoleon's campaigns obsessively and reportedly expressed regret that he would never know his father personally. This tension between public conformity and private longing characterized his entire adult life. The Duke of Reichstadt died on July 22, 1832, at Schönbrunn Palace, aged just 21. Tuberculosis had ravaged his body, ending any remaining hopes for a Bonaparte restoration through the legitimate line. His death was mourned by Bonapartist sympathizers across Europe, who saw in him the symbol of imperial dreams permanently extinguished. The Austrian court conducted his funeral with appropriate ceremony, but deliberately avoided any suggestion of imperial grandeur. He was buried in the Habsburg imperial crypt, where he remained until 1940, when Hitler ordered his remains transferred to Paris as a propaganda gesture. Today, he rests beside his father in Les Invalides. His legacy remains largely symbolic. Napoleon II never ruled, never married, and never had the opportunity to prove himself in war or peace. Yet his brief life represents the human cost of his father's ambitions, a young man born to greatness, but condemned to live in shadow, dying before he could establish whether he inherited his father's genius along with his blood. Charles Léon Denuel was born on December 13, 1806, the son of Éléonore Denuel de la Plaine, one of Napoleon's mistresses during his marriage to Josephine. Unlike many of Napoleon's rumored illegitimate children, Charles Léon was formally acknowledged by the emperor, who provided financial support and took active interest in the boy's upbringing and education. The acknowledgement came at a crucial time in Napoleon's reign. Still married to Josephine but increasingly concerned about the succession, Napoleon's recognition of this son served both personal and political purposes. It demonstrated his fertility at a time when his childless marriage was becoming a dynastic liability, while providing him with a male heir, however illegitimate. Napoleon granted Charles the title Count Léon, providing him with social status appropriate to an imperial bastard. This recognition distinguished Charles from other rumored illegitimate children and ensured his place in Bonaparte family history. The title carried modest financial benefits and opened doors that would remain closed to unacknowledged natural children. Napoleon ensured Charles received an education befitting his acknowledged status. The boy was sent to excellent schools and received training in languages, military science, and the social graces expected of nobility. Imperial patronage protected him from the social stigma typically associated with illegitimate birth during this period. During the empire's height, Charles enjoyed privileged access to court life and occasionally appeared at imperial ceremonies. However, Napoleon was careful to maintain appropriate distance, acknowledging the boy without elevating him to threaten legitimate succession claims. This balance characterized their relationship throughout Charles's youth. The fall of the empire in 1814 dramatically altered Charles's prospects. With Napoleon in exile and the Bourbon Restoration in progress, the boy lost imperial protection and faced an uncertain future. His mother's connections and his own education became his primary assets as the Bonaparte name transformed from blessing to potential liability. Charles Léon's adult career proved consistently disappointing, marked by financial difficulties and failed enterprises. Despite his education and title, he struggled to establish himself professionally during the Bourbon Restoration and subsequent regimes. His Bonaparte connection proved more hindrance than help in finding stable employment or building a successful career. He attempted various business ventures throughout his life, but most ended in failure. Contemporary accounts suggest he lacked his father's discipline and strategic thinking. inheriting instead a taste for luxury without the means to support it. His financial problems became chronic, leading to repeated requests for assistance from Bonaparte family members who had achieved more stable circumstances. During the Second Empire under Napoleon III, Charles experienced a brief revival of fortune. His cousin's rise to power brought renewed respect for the Bonaparte name and modest financial support. However, these benefits proved temporary, and Charles never achieved the security or prominence that his early acknowledgement had seemed to promise. Charles Léon married and produced several children, ensuring that this branch of Napoleon's illegitimate line would continue into subsequent generations. His marriage provided some financial stability, though not enough to solve his chronic money problems. His wife's family connections offered modest social advantages that partially compensated for his irregular status. His descendants continued to use the Bonaparte name in various forms, maintaining connection to their imperial ancestry while building more conventional lives. Some achieved modest success in business or professional careers, gradually integrating into mainstream French society while preserving family stories of their famous ancestor. The survival of this bloodline contrasts sharply with the extinction of Napoleon's legitimate line through the Duke of Reichstadt. Charles's descendants represent one of the few verified genetic continuations of Napoleon's heritage, though their social status remained permanently affected by their illegitimate origins. Napoleon's relationship with Charles Léon was warm but carefully bounded. The emperor showed genuine affection for the boy during his childhood, providing financial support and taking interest in his education. However, Napoleon maintained clear distinctions between his acknowledged illegitimate son and any potential legitimate heirs. Letters and contemporary accounts suggest Napoleon saw Charles as proof of his fertility and masculinity, important considerations given his childless marriage to Josephine. The boy's existence helped counter whispers about the emperor's ability to produce heirs, though Napoleon was careful never to suggest Charles might inherit imperial titles. The relationship suffered during Napoleon's later years and exile. Physical separation made maintaining contact difficult, and Napoleon's attention focused increasingly on his legitimate son with Marie-Louise. Charles received some financial provisions in Napoleon's will, but these were modest compared to bequests to the emperor's legitimate heir and other family members. Charles Léon's legacy is primarily genetic rather than political or social. His acknowledged status distinguishes him from other rumored Bonaparte illegitimate children, providing historians with clear documentation of this particular bloodline. His life illustrates the complex situation of acknowledged natural children in 19th century aristocratic society. Unlike his legitimate half-brother who died young and childless, Charles successfully continued his father's genetic line through multiple descendants. However, his chronic financial difficulties and modest achievements demonstrate that acknowledgement alone could not guarantee success or prominence for Napoleon's illegitimate children. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the limitations of imperial favor. Despite Napoleon's acknowledgement and early support, Charles never achieved the security or distinction that might have been expected. His descendants gradually merged into the broader population, carrying Bonaparte blood but living conventional lives far removed from imperial grandeur. Alexandre Florian Joseph Colonna Walewski was born on May 4, 1810, the son of Maria Walewska, a Polish countess who became one of Napoleon's most significant mistresses. Unlike Charles Léon, Alexander was never formally acknowledged by Napoleon, though the emperor provided discreet financial support and the physical resemblance between father and son was widely remarked upon by contemporaries. Maria Walewska had met Napoleon during his Polish campaigns, and their relationship combined genuine affection with political calculation. She represented Polish hopes for independence, while Napoleon found in her both personal comfort and a useful connection to Polish nobility. Their son was born into this complex web of personal and political relationships. The lack of formal acknowledgement reflected political rather than personal considerations. By 1810, Napoleon was actively pursuing his marriage to Marie-Louise of Austria, making recognition of another illegitimate son diplomatically awkward. However, Napoleon ensured the boy would be financially provided for and receive appropriate education. Alexander received an excellent education reflecting both his mother's social status and Napoleon's discreet patronage. He was educated in Paris and later in London, developing the linguistic skills and cultural sophistication that would serve him throughout his diplomatic career. His education emphasized languages, history, and the social graces essential for navigating aristocratic society. During his youth, Alexandre demonstrated the intelligence and charisma that would later make him successful in diplomatic circles. Contemporary accounts describe him as handsome, charming, and possessed of his father's penetrating intelligence. Unlike Charles Léon, who struggled with practical matters, Alexandre showed early aptitude for the political and social maneuvering required for success in 19th century Europe. The fall of Napoleon's empire forced Alexandre to navigate carefully between his Bonaparte heritage and the new political realities. His mother's Polish connections and his own education provided alternatives to dependence on Bonaparte family support, allowing him greater independence than some of Napoleon's other children enjoyed. Alexandre Walewski achieved the most distinguished career of any of Napoleon's children, building a successful diplomatic and political life that culminated in high office under the Second Empire. His career began in the 1830s when he entered French diplomatic service, where his education, social skills, and family connections proved invaluable assets. He served in various diplomatic posts throughout Europe, gaining experience and building the network of contacts that would support his later advancement. His fluency in multiple languages and understanding of European court society made him particularly effective in delicate negotiations. Unlike his acknowledged half-brother Charles Léon, Alexandre demonstrated real talent for his chosen profession. The most dramatic phase of Alexandre's career came with the rise of Napoleon III, his half-nephew. The new emperor appointed Alexandre to increasingly important positions, culminating in his service as foreign minister from 1855 to 1860. In this role, Alexandre helped conduct French diplomacy during critical years, including the Crimean War and the Italian independence movement. As foreign minister, Alexandre proved competent and reliable, managing complex international relationships with skill. His tenure included the Congress of Paris following the Crimean War, where he helped negotiate the peace settlement. He demonstrated that Napoleon's children could achieve genuine distinction through merit rather than merely inherited status. Alexandre married well, choosing spouses who enhanced his social position and political prospects. His marriages provided him with legitimate children who would continue his line, though they carried their father's irregular status as unacknowledged Bonaparte descendants. These unions helped integrate him into established aristocratic society while maintaining his unique heritage. His descendants established themselves successfully in French society, building on the foundation Alexandre had created through his diplomatic career. Some pursued military service, others entered business or the professions, gradually moving away from direct political involvement while maintaining pride in their Bonaparte ancestry. The survival and success of Alexandre's line represents one of the most positive outcomes among Napoleon's children. Unlike the extinct legitimate line or the struggling descendants of Charles Léon, Alexandre's family achieved stable integration into the French elite while preserving their connection to imperial history. Alexandre's relationship with Napoleon was complicated by the lack of formal acknowledgement, yet evidence suggests genuine affection between father and son. Napoleon's letters to Maria Walewska reveal deep feelings for both mother and child, though political considerations prevented public recognition of paternity. The emperor provided financial support for Alexandre's education and occasionally arranged discreet meetings with the boy. Contemporary witnesses reported strong physical resemblance between father and son, and Napoleon's behavior toward Alexandre suggested paternal pride despite the absence of formal recognition. During Napoleon's exile, contact between father and son became impossible, though Napoleon continued to inquire about Alexandre's welfare through intermediaries. The emperor's will included provisions for Maria Walewska and their son, though these were smaller than bequests to acknowledged family members. Alexandre's later success suggests he inherited not only his father's intelligence, but also his strategic instincts. Alexandre Walewski's legacy stands as the most successful example of Napoleon's children adapting to post-imperial realities. His diplomatic career proved that Bonaparte descendants could achieve distinction through merit and talent rather than merely inherited status. His service as foreign minister under Napoleon III demonstrated continuity between the two Napoleonic eras. His success contrasts sharply with the fate of his legitimate half-brother, who died young and powerless, and his acknowledged half-brother Charles Léon, who struggled with financial difficulties throughout his life. Alexandre's career suggests that in some cases the stigma of illegitimate birth could be overcome through exceptional ability and favorable circumstances. Modern DNA analysis has confirmed Alexandre's paternity, removing any remaining doubt about his Bonaparte heritage. His descendants continue to represent one of the few verified genetic continuations of Napoleon's line, though they have long since integrated into conventional French society. His life demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations facing Napoleon's illegitimate children in 19th century Europe. Hélène de Montholon was born on July 1, 1819, on the island of St Helena during Napoleon's final exile. Her father was officially Charles Tristan de Montholon, one of Napoleon's loyal companions in exile, but rumors persisted that Napoleon himself was her biological father. The circumstances of her birth on the isolated island, combined with the close quarters shared by Napoleon's small entourage, fueled speculation about her true parentage. The child was nicknamed Napoleon by the emperor, who showed her considerable affection during his final years. Whether this affection reflected paternal love or merely the natural fondness of an isolated man for a young child remains a subject of historical debate. The confined circumstances of St Helena made it impossible to definitively establish paternity through contemporary means. Charles Tristan de Montholon never publicly disputed his paternity, maintaining that Hélène was his legitimate daughter. However, his wife Albine's behavior and the gossip among the St Helena community suggested more complex relationships than official records indicated. The isolated island setting created unique conditions that complicate historical analysis of family relationships. Following Napoleon's death in 1821, Hélène left St Helena with the Montholon family and was raised as their daughter. She received an education appropriate to her official status as the daughter of a French count, though her childhood was marked by the financial difficulties that affected many former imperial loyalists during the Bourbon Restoration. As an adult, Hélène lived quietly, avoiding the public attention that might have invited scrutiny of her disputed parentage. She demonstrated none of the political ambitions or public prominence that characterized some of Napoleon's acknowledged children, instead pursuing a conventional life appropriate to a minor noblewoman of her era. Her adult life was largely unremarkable from a historical perspective, though she maintained connections with other Bonaparte family members and former imperial supporters. She appears to have neither sought nor received special treatment based on any claimed connection to Napoleon, suggesting either that she knew nothing of the rumors or chose to ignore them. Hélène de Montholon married and established a family, continuing the Montholon line regardless of her true biological parentage. Her marriage was conventional for a woman of her social class, providing stability and social position without particular distinction. Her children were raised as members of the Montholon family with no special claims to Bonaparte heritage. Her descendants have generally maintained the official family position that she was Charles Tristan de Montholon's daughter, though some family stories have preserved alternative versions of her parentage. Modern genetic testing could potentially resolve the question definitively, but such testing has not been conducted on available remains. Napoleon's relationship with young Hélène during his St Helena years was affectionate but ambiguous. Contemporary accounts describe him playing with the child and showing her paternal kindness, but similar behavior toward other children in his entourage makes it difficult to determine whether his attention reflected biological connection or merely the loneliness of exile. The emperor's diary entries and letters mention Hélène fondly, but contain no explicit claims of paternity. His choice of the nickname Napoleon might suggest special affection, or might simply reflect his general tendency to bestow attention on the few children present during his isolated final years. The ambiguous nature of their relationship reflects the broader complexities of life on St Helena, where the small community's close quarters and strained circumstances created opportunities for both intimacy and misunderstanding. Without DNA evidence or explicit contemporary testimony, the true nature of Napoleon's relationship to Hélène remains historically uncertain. Hélène de Montholon's legacy is primarily as a historical question mark rather than a confirmed Bonaparte descendant. Her case illustrates the difficulties of establishing paternity in historical cases where documentation is incomplete and contemporary sources are ambiguous or unreliable. Unlike Napoleon's acknowledged children, Hélène never claimed Bonaparte heritage or sought benefits from any putative connection to the emperor. Her quiet life suggests either ignorance of the speculation surrounding her birth or a deliberate choice to avoid the complications that might arise from pursuing such claims. Her story demonstrates how the unique circumstances of Napoleon's exile created situations that continue to puzzle historians. The confined world of St Helena, with its small community and complex relationships, generated questions about family connections that may never be definitively resolved without modern scientific methods. Josephine Napoleon de Montholon was born on February 26, 1820, on St Helena, making her another child born during Napoleon's final exile, whose parentage has been questioned by historians. Like her older sister Hélène, she was officially the daughter of Charles Tristan de Montholon and his wife Albine, but the circumstances of her birth during Napoleon's exile have led to speculation about her true paternity. Her given names clearly reflected the Bonaparte influence on St Helena. Josephine honoring Napoleon's first wife, and Napoleon directly invoking the emperor himself. These name choices, whether made by the Montholons or suggested by Napoleon, indicate the complex relationships within the small exile community and the blurred boundaries between official and unofficial family connections. Tragically, Josephine Napoleon died in infancy on July 13, 1820, at just 4 months old. Her death was recorded as resulting from natural causes, though the specific illness was not documented in detail. Infant mortality was tragically common in the early 19th century, and the isolated conditions on St Helena may have made medical care particularly challenging. Napoleon reportedly showed grief at the child's death, though his reaction was consistent with his general fondness for children, rather than necessarily indicating paternal relationship. The emperor's declining health during this period may have made him particularly sensitive to mortality and loss, explaining his emotional response to the infant's death. Her brief life and early death meant that questions about her true parentage remained entirely academic. Unlike her sister Hélène, who lived to adulthood and could theoretically have pursued claims to Bonaparte heritage, Josephine Napoleon's death foreclosed any possibility of her playing a role in the complex legacy of Napoleon's potential children. Josephine Napoleon de Montholon's legacy is minimal due to her infant death, existing primarily as a footnote in the broader question of Napoleon's potential children born during his St Helena exile. Her case demonstrates the tragic frequency of infant mortality in the early 19th century and the particular challenges faced by the small community sharing Napoleon's final exile. Her death eliminated any possibility of later verification of her parentage through descendants or personal testimony. Modern historians can only speculate about her true father based on the circumstances of her birth and the relationships within the St Helena community, making her one of the most tenuous connections in the complex web of Napoleon's potential offspring. The brief life and early death of this infant illustrates the human cost of political exile, where even the youngest members of the community faced the isolation and limited resources that characterized Napoleon's final years. Her story serves as a reminder that behind the grand narratives of imperial history lay personal tragedies and lost possibilities that affected entire families. Émilie Louise Marie Françoise Josephine Pellapra was born on December 22, 1806, in France. Her mother, Françoise Marie Leroy, claimed that Napoleon was the child's father, though this claim was never acknowledged by the emperor or officially recognized by any subsequent Bonaparte family members. The circumstances surrounding her conception allegedly occurred during one of Napoleon's campaigns, though specific details remain vague and unsubstantiated. Unlike Charles Léon, who received formal acknowledgement, or Alexandre Walewski, who enjoyed discreet imperial support, Émilie received no official recognition or financial assistance from Napoleon. Her mother's claim remained just that, an assertion without documentary evidence or imperial confirmation. This lack of acknowledgement distinguished her case from Napoleon's proven illegitimate children. The timing of Émilie's birth coincided with Napoleon's period of greatest power and numerous romantic liaisons, making maternal claims of imperial paternity plausible, if not verifiable. However, the absence of any supporting evidence beyond maternal assertion makes her case significantly weaker than those of Napoleon's acknowledged or well-documented illegitimate children. Émilie was raised by her mother without imperial support or acknowledgement, experiencing none of the educational advantages or social connections that benefited Napoleon's recognized children. Her upbringing was typical of her mother's modest social class, without the linguistic training, cultural refinement, or political connections that characterized the education of Charles Léon or Alexandre Walewski. As she matured, Émilie occasionally attempted to assert her claimed Bonaparte heritage, though these efforts met with little success. The lack of documentary evidence or imperial acknowledgement severely limited her ability to gain recognition or benefits from her alleged connection to Napoleon. Her social position remained that of her mother's class, rather than reflecting any imperial lineage. Throughout her adult life, Émilie maintained her claim to Bonaparte parentage, but struggled to convince others of its validity. Contemporary society generally dismissed unsubstantiated paternity claims, particularly those lacking imperial acknowledgement or supporting documentation. Her case illustrates the difficulties faced by claimants who could not provide convincing evidence of their alleged connections. Émilie married within her social class and produced children who inherited her claimed but unproven Bonaparte connection. Her descendants have occasionally revived claims to imperial heritage, though these have generally been dismissed by historians due to lack of supporting evidence. Her family line continues to maintain oral traditions about their alleged Bonaparte ancestry. Some of Émilie's descendants pursued genealogical research attempting to establish their Bonaparte connection, but these efforts have failed to produce convincing documentation. Modern genetic testing could potentially resolve the question definitively, though such testing would require cooperation from established Bonaparte family lines and access to appropriate genetic samples. The persistence of family claims across multiple generations suggests genuine belief in the Bonaparte connection, though this could reflect family mythology rather than historical fact. Many families have preserved stories of famous ancestors that may or may not have basis in reality, making oral tradition alone insufficient evidence for establishing parentage claims. No credible evidence exists of any direct relationship between Napoleon and Émilie Pellapra. The emperor's documented relationships and correspondence contain no references to Émilie or her mother, in stark contrast to his acknowledged connections with the mothers of Charles Léon and Alexandre Walewski. Napoleon's meticulous record-keeping and correspondence habits make the complete absence of any mention of Émilie or her mother particularly significant. His letters document many of his romantic relationships and show his consistent interest in the welfare of his acknowledged children, making the total silence regarding Émilie telling. The lack of any financial provisions for Émilie in Napoleon's will, combined with the absence of any contemporary references to her or her mother, strongly suggests that any relationship between Napoleon and Émilie's mother was either non-existent or so brief and insignificant that the emperor himself may not have recalled it. Émilie Pellapra's legacy serves primarily as an example of unsubstantiated paternity claims that surrounded famous figures like Napoleon. Her case illustrates the distinction between proven illegitimate children who received acknowledgement or support and mere claimants whose assertions lack credible evidence. Her story demonstrates the social dynamics surrounding illegitimate birth claims in the 19th century, when imperial or noble paternity could potentially provide social advancement for both mother and child. However, it also shows the limitations of such claims when they lacked official acknowledgement or supporting documentation. Modern historians generally classify Émilie Pellapra among the doubtful or disproven claimants to Bonaparte parentage, distinguished from well-documented cases like Charles Léon and Alexandre Walewski. Her case serves as a reminder that fame and power attract not only genuine relationships but also false claims seeking to share in reflected glory. The 6 lives we have examined reveal dramatically different outcomes for those who bore or claimed Bonaparte blood. Napoleon II, the legitimate heir, enjoyed imperial titles and Austrian nobility but died young and powerless, never ruling the empire he was born to inherit. His early death extinguished Napoleon's legitimate line and any hopes for a direct restoration through hereditary succession. Charles Léon, acknowledged but illegitimate, struggled throughout his life with financial difficulties despite his early imperial recognition. His case demonstrates that acknowledgement alone could not guarantee success or security for Napoleon's natural children. Yet his descendants survived and continued the bloodline when the legitimate line failed. Alexandre Walewski achieved the greatest success, building a distinguished diplomatic career despite lacking formal acknowledgement. His service as foreign minister under Napoleon III proved that Bonaparte children could achieve genuine distinction through merit. His success contrasts sharply with the struggles of his acknowledged half-brother Charles Léon. The Montholon children, Hélène and Josephine Napoleon, represent the ambiguous cases where paternity remains disputed. Hélène lived quietly without claiming Bonaparte heritage, while her infant sister died before such questions could matter. Émilie Pellapra's unsubstantiated claims illustrate the false connections that fame inevitably attracts. The irony of Napoleon's genetic legacy lies in the extinction of his legitimate line through the Duke of Reichstadt, while his illegitimate children successfully continued his bloodline. The heir born to rule died young and childless, while the unacknowledged son Alexandre and the acknowledged Charles Léon both produced descendants who carry Bonaparte genes into the present day. This pattern reflects broader historical trends where legitimate lines often proved more vulnerable than illegitimate ones. The legitimate heir faced greater political pressure and constraints, while illegitimate children enjoyed more freedom to adapt to changing circumstances. Their lower profiles sometimes protected them from the political persecution that threatened more prominent family members. The survival of illegitimate lines also demonstrates the importance of maternal families in providing support and protection for natural children. Maria Walewski's Polish connections helped Alexander, while Charles Léon's mother's family provided some stability during difficult periods. Legitimate heirs often lacked such alternative support networks. Today, several lines claim descent from Napoleon through his illegitimate children, with varying degrees of historical credibility. The Walewski descendants represent the most historically well-documented continuation of Napoleon's genetic heritage, supported by contemporary evidence and modern DNA analysis. Their integration into conventional French society demonstrates successful adaptation to post-imperial realities. Descendants of Charles Léon also continue to exist, though their family histories show the economic struggles that characterized their ancestors' life. Some have achieved modest success in business or professional careers while maintaining family traditions about their imperial ancestry. Their stories illustrate both the pride and burden of carrying disputed noble heritage. The Bonaparte name itself continues through various family branches, including collateral lines descended from Napoleon's siblings. However, the direct paternal line through Napoleon himself depends entirely on these illegitimate connections, as his legitimate son left no heirs. This genetic legacy remains one of history's most fascinating examples of how political legitimacy and biological continuity can diverge. The lives of Napoleon's children illustrate the complex inheritance of fame and power. Each faced the challenge of establishing individual identity while carrying the weight of their father's unprecedented legacy. Some, like Alexandre Walewski, successfully converted their heritage into personal achievement. Others, like Charles Léon, struggled beneath expectations they could never fulfill. Their varied fates remind us that genetics alone do not determine destiny. The legitimate heir with every advantage died young and powerless, while an unacknowledged son achieved ministerial rank through personal merit. Birth circumstances mattered less than individual character, ability, and the capacity to adapt to changing historical circumstances. Perhaps most poignantly, these lives demonstrate the human cost of living in a great man's shadow. Whether acknowledged or hidden, legitimate or natural, each of Napoleon's children faced the impossible task of measuring themselves against a figure who had dominated Europe. Their stories remind us that behind every historical giant stand family members whose own achievements and struggles deserve recognition in their own right. In the end, the children of Napoleon Bonaparte carved out lives that ranged from tragic to triumphant, from obscure to distinguished. They represent the continuation of one man's influence through biology rather than politics, carrying forward genetic traces of imperial ambition into a world that had moved beyond the possibility of such concentrated power. Their legacy lies not in crowns or conquests, but in the quieter continuity of family lines that preserve historical connections across the generations.